Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. This week, we have the person that connects the dots. As we deal with this current climate, there's a lot of talk about where we're going, but you never know where you're going until you find out where you came from. And this person helps us with that. So we have the founder of Anders Genealogical Services and genealogist herself, Mica Anders. Welcome to the
Hey,
show,
hey,
Mica. How
thank
you
you. Thanks
doing?
for having me.
Oh, welcome back. I guess we can say we can pull back the curtain somewhat. We had you on the show several months ago. Amazing conversation, lots of nuggets, but the audio wasn't to our satisfaction. And
hmm
thankfully, we know you're a busy person. You reached out and said, "Yeah, let's do it again." So
That's
glad to
right.
have you.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm happy to do it again.
Yep. So like I said, you're a genealogist. You help those that are looking, to find out about where they came from. Just talk about um, that challenge itself, as far as helping people find their ancestry.
Yeah. So I actually gave a presentation 2 days ago, and I asked everybody in the room, how far back can you trace your family? And nobody really wanted to answer that. So I said, okay, raise your hand if you know all four of your grandparents? Most people raise their hands. Do you know all four of your grandparents?
Um, well, for me, it's going to be six. I guess we could
Ah,
say, because
mm-hmm.
of the adoption thrown into the
Exactly.
equation. So
Exactly.
yeah, five of the six.
Okay.
I know.
Okay. So then the next thing I asked is who knows all of your great grandparents? And literally all the hands in the room but two went down.
Hmm.
That's just great grandparents. That's not even that long ago. That's your grandparents' parents.
So for me, I knew hmm, three, three of the
hmm
six. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So most people don't even know their great grandparents or all of their great grandparents. And think about that's just a few generations back. And to have already lost our lineage in just a couple generations is everything. Think about the stories that are lost, the history that's lost, the traditions, the thing that makes us who we are that have been passed down. We don't even know where some of that stuff came from in just a couple generations. So that's just a few generations. That's not even talking about the process of trying to go back to the people who were born in the early 1800s and the people who were born enslaved and the people who came across the ocean. And so
Hmm.
so the challenges are because we don't even know a couple generations, we're starting really fresh, trying to just get back a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more until we can really learn who we are and reclaim some of those names and those stories and those traditions.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't know if it's just the society we're in where it's just so fast moving and we're all, spread out across the country, or in some instances the world, where it's hard to keep up with your generation, like your
Yes.
first cousins, or the children of your first cousins. Like, I have
hmm
problems with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Reunions are less common. Family
Hmm.
reunions for a lot of people were a really big deal. They were an annual tradition. I know some families still do them. A lot of families don't do them anymore, either because of cost or everybody's kids are in a summer thing. And so trying to get all the kids together, their schools all start at different times, or even just whoever that person was that was the glue, when that person passes, there isn't necessarily that next person who picks it up and becomes the glue for the family.
Hmm. Like, I guess with your family, I remember our conversation, and you mentioned that you being the genealogist, I just assumed that you would be the person spearheading these efforts, but you said that you don't want to step on any toes, but those gatherings aren't happening. So just
hmm
share with my audience how you kind of circumvent that process and still get together with relatives when you can.
Yeah. So what we talked about last time was even though I'm 42, I still feel like one of the kids because a
Hmm.
lot of our aunts and uncles and my mom in this case, they're still living. So they're still the adults, right? They're in their 70s and their 60s, but they're in charge in our minds still, even though there's like 30 first cousins, but we still are deferring to our parents, even though I'm sure our parents would be like, please take over. So there's this really weird situation where we still respect them as the decision makers. And so we don't want to plan on their behalf. But interesting that we have this conversation because just last week, one of my cousins did reach out and he was like, you guys, can we do something? And of course, all the cousins say, sure, sure. And then nobody started the plan. So I
Hmm.
finally said, okay, August. Will August work? Like somebody has to move it along. Just saying, yay, let's get together isn't going to make a plan where everybody can fly and drive into a central location. Um, so hopefully that goes forward. But the other thing I do is we just do like mini reunions, right? So my mom had 10 siblings or nine. She's number four of 10. So there's a lot of cousins. And so maybe instead of trying to get everybody together, we just have little mini reunions. So I go down to Arizona where one of my cousins and her kids and grandkids all live, and I bring my kids and we have a mini reunion and some of our other cousins will join us there, or maybe another group of cousins, they live in Kentucky and they'll all get together. Some will drive down from Michigan and they'll all meet over there. So maybe we can't all get together, but we'll try and have little mini reunions to keep the stories alive, make sure our kids know each other, make sure, because at this point my kids, right, so that's their second cousins and second cousins once removed and some of the third cousins already, and keeping that alive and making sure they still know our parents. And it matters to feel that connected. We'll get together and we'll be having these conversations and we'll be like, wait, you do that thing too? I thought that
Hmm.
was a weird quirk only I had. And then another cousin is like, oh, I thought I was the only one who did that. And then we realize like the power of these things that have just been passed down in our families that connect us in these super obscure ways that we never even thought of, these weird little quirks that we have. Or, oh, the way I was raised seemed really weird. Oh, but your parent did that too. Well, that makes sense because our parents were siblings. So it helps, make some of those connections and learn like, oh, I wonder if they got that from one of their parents and things like that.
Hmm. How do you view social media when it comes to maintaining those connections, like the pros and cons of it? Because people can look at it as far as because we're connected on social media, it isn't quite as necessary to plan those gatherings. Like,
I
what's
I
your
think
stance
that's
on that?
definitely factored in. I think, for two things. When my high school, sort of a tangent, this will make sense. When it was
Hmm.
time for our 10-year reunion, I'm from the class that was like early Facebook. So everyone's like, well, why would we have a reunion? We can still see what everybody's doing. So it took away that interest in making an in person connection. And I think some of that happens with families too. Well, we can see the babies who have been born, we can see when somebody got, you know, a promotion or when somebody had like a high school graduation. We don't always have to go to everything. I think that is the mindset some people have. But
Hmm.
it's not, it's real, but it's not real. But seeing it on Facebook doesn't mean that the person who did it can feel that you saw it or can feel that connection with you or have an actual interaction, not just a like button. But I think Facebook's the best for reunion things at this point, which is funny because it's, people have their thoughts on it, and it's not really something younger generations use. But we have found that even just having a private family Facebook page, which has some of my aunts and uncles, cousins' kids, kids of those kids as well, it just gives us a place if there's something we want to share that maybe we don't want to put on all of Facebook, we can put it in that group. Or, I found some family photos recently of our grandparents, and I just posted them in there because I don't need the whole internet to see that stuff. And what's fun is it sparks conversations and memories. So somebody will respond, maybe one of my aunts and uncles, oh, I remember that day, and this is what we were doing, something I would never have known. It's just a photo to me. I wasn't there. And so now we're getting a bit of a story. And then maybe somebody else chimes in, and then maybe a great grandkid chimes in and was like, well, who even are these people in this picture? So they may have never even seen this photo before and even know that these are their great great grandparents.
Hmm. Yeah. So you coined yourself the history detective. What sparked that passion? Did you as a kid were you always getting your Angela Lansbury, Carmen Sandiego on,
Heck
trying to
yeah.
solve solve mysteries?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I grew up watching PBS a lot. And so they had all these mysteries on there, like Agatha Christie and Miss Marple. And then there was Murder, She Wrote. And I would read all kinds of detective books, Nancy Drew, um, Cam Jansen, all these different books I would read growing up. Super, super nerdy. It was great. And I did play. I loved Carmen Sandiego. That was such
Me
a
too.
great. Oh my gosh! And then they had the game show too.
Uh-huh.
That was so
Yeah,
great.
with Lynn Winfield or Whitfield.
As the
I
chief.
forgot. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So I loved mysteries. I always did, and I love puzzles. So if
Hmm.
you really all genealogy is taking all these little puzzle pieces and trying to make them fit into the same puzzle. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but it's really just about loving clues and loving puzzles and trying to solve something. So it fits right in.
Yeah. Has there ever been a moment where either you were stumped or you were wrong as far as thinking that you found this individual's, you know, say father or, even further down the chain, great grandparents, but
Yeah, I haven't
you're
been
wrong?
wrong yet, which I should knock on some wood. But I have been stumped. There's times when the records just go dry.
Hmm.
Even when you watch TV shows like Finding Your Roots and all that, they always talk about the lines that succeed. But if you watch really carefully, they'll draw the pretty tree with the animation, and then one branch will just say, and that's as far as we could get on this branch. But look what we found over here. So
Right.
even when you have a team of like 15 professional genealogists, there are places where they get stuck too. So
Hmm.
there's a point where there just aren't any records. And, once you've looked in archives in person, you've talked to all the family members you can, sometimes there's just nothing there. But sometimes the things that seemed like mysteries, maybe 5, 7 years later, some random archive appears online, or somebody finds something in the basement of the archive or in the basement of a church or something that they didn't know they had, and they bring it out and share it, or a phone call happens and all of a sudden something that was a dead end could open back up. I had that happen with one of my families. Once DNA came online, we were totally stuck, but once DNA was available and they did an ancestry DNA test, we were able to take their line and trace it back and connect them with other living relatives on a branch that was completely a dead end for years and years and years.
Hmm. Yeah, well, talk about that. Talk about the importance of DNA and how that's kind of unlocked the door to just unfound, unsolved mysteries. We'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to start talking about DNA with, do not take a DNA test if you are super inflexible in the family structure you have now,
Hmm.
because DNA can unlock all kinds of stuff, good and bad. You might learn you have a sibling you didn't know you had. You might learn that one of your parents or grandparents isn't the person that you thought they were. Maybe they were adopted and you never knew. Maybe um, somebody was raised as the sibling of their parent because their parent was a teen mom or something like that. So the person you thought was your aunt was really like your mom or a generation up or something like that. So just be ready for whatever you can find. But if you're open to adventure and open to possibility, it can solve so many things. So if you're somebody who doesn't know one or both of your bio parents, DNA can be the first way you figure that out, because it's going to connect you in a way that there may not ever have been a paper trail for you to use. Um,
Right.
if you are a family who was formerly enslaved, DNA can put your family back together pre-enslavement. So I've done that for some of my clients. I've been able to, actually for my own family as well, follow my family tree follow the family tree of my DNA matches and put families back together that were separated by enslavement. So there's nothing that would ever put them back together in other ways. Last names have changed. People have been sold. They were moved. So there was no other way to put them together. But through DNA, we were able to. Or
Yeah.
I had one client, she was in her 80s. She'd never known who her father was. Her mom had given her two different possible names. So you can't do much when you have two possibilities, right? So in her 80s, she decided she was ready to figure it out. And so she hired me, and me and my team used a combination of paper records and DNA analysis, and we figured out who her dad was. And we got her a name, and it was one of the two names. So that was good. It wasn't a third name, which has happened before also.
Oh, wow.
So it was one of those names. And we were able to then learn about his life. We were able to learn maybe how he and her mom had even met, and had their relationship, whatever we would like to call that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things like that. I had another client who didn't know who his dad was. And unfortunately, by the time he took a DNA test, his dad had passed, but he was able to meet his half brother. So his dad had another son. His dad had never known about him, never
Mm-hmm.
even had known he'd existed. The mom had never told him. So the sad part was he never got to make that connection and say, here I am. I would love to meet you, because his dad had passed. But getting that connection with his brother helped heal something. And aunts and uncles, right? So his dad had passed, but he got to meet aunts and uncles and really start to feel connected to a branch of his family he'd never known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I shared in our previous conversation about my personal situation where um, I met my biological father several years ago and just recently met three biological brothers. Um, and how emotional that is. Like you know that these people exist and you anticipate that day of meeting them, but you just don't know the ripple effects, like how it's going to impact you, how it's going to impact um, them, how it's going to impact uh, say like my mom and my adopted family. So like what you said as far as like tread carefully, tread lightly, because you just never know what's on the other side. I think
Mm-hmm.
is very important. Um, when it comes to like the family that you've always known, like just talk about the importance of having their support when you're
Yeah.
seeking out, a biological parent or other loved ones that you've never met or
Mm-hmm.
haven't built a relationship with yet.
Yeah, I think what I've observed for a lot of people is oftentimes the parent or family who raised you, they sometimes feel maybe jealous. Maybe jealousy is not the right word. Worried
Hmm.
that you're going to find this other person who's biologically related to you, and they're going to then replace the relationship you've had with the person who raised you. And, for me, love can only multiply. There's always room for more people. Um, but I think as you go on the journey, some people choose to tell their family who raised them. Some people choose not to tell them because they're worried about what that relationship will look like. I think sharing that you're on your journey is probably a good idea, but also, making it clear that this journey isn't about replacing you. This journey is just about, finding a part of me that's missing.
Hmm.
And you know I was not lacking in love. That's not what I'm looking for. Using words that really help them understand, so they can be a support to you on your journey, so they can be a champion in your corner, because it's a journey of ups and downs, as you said, right? You may
Yeah.
find your family and they've already passed, or you find them and they don't want anything to do with you. You don't know, because that happens too. Is you find out who your other or one of your bio parents or bio grandparents is, and they say, oh no, that's just wrong, right? There's people who, or sometimes, I've had cases where um, the bio mom raised the person, and insists, even after the DNA test, that the dad who raised the person is their bio dad, even though DNA makes it very clear that's not true.
Right.
So that it can be really delicate. So it can be a journey that you don't necessarily want to go on alone. I know there's some great like groups on social media that people connect with before they go on their journey, just so they're like, okay, if my relatives don't support me in this, I want to have a group of people who understand what I'm going through and can go through this journey with me. But other times, everything's amazing. So I have another client who met their bio sister. She was adopted, and she took a DNA test, and it turned out it was somebody she'd known her whole life. And they never knew they were related. It was a complete accident that they found out they were half sisters. And now they've just totally embraced, both families have just joined. So everybody just got extra siblings on both sides, extra parents on both sides, and they just really just all embraced each other. And I think that's what can happen also. But in other cases, when you find out that maybe you're the product of an affair, or in my case, my grandma was the product of an affair. We never knew. All paper records say her dad is the man on her birth certificate. DNA says that my grandma was married and this other man was married, and they were married to other people, but my grandma is the product of their extramarital relationship.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338, or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
So when it comes to finding your lost parents, and just talk about the importance of that when it comes to tracing potential health issues within your family that you would have never known beforehand.
Knowing your health issues can have a huge impact. Some people choose to DNA test and only get the medical DNA test results. So it'll tell you sometimes, are you predisposed to Parkinson's, or are you predisposed to left-handedness, or something like that. And I think those can be a decent place to start. I would say they're not a substitute for trying to learn a deeper health history. In my case, I have the BRCA1 gene, which is a cancer gene, and it's come through my family. I've been able to trace it. My sisters have it. My first cousins have it. My dad had it. And knowing that history allowed me to do preventative testing, so that I did eventually get cancer, which was what was expected, but I was able to catch it really early. I was able to get a lot of treatment right away because I already knew. So for people who are on a journey to learn who their bio parents are, both from an emotional place as well as from a health place, whether or not you end up having relationships with the folks that you are biologically related to, learning some of that health history can be super, super important. And there's ways to do that. So once we're able to trace who your bio family was, we can start looking at death certificates and trying to figure out, okay, are there certain causes of death that we're seeing a lot? Or, oh, wait, a lot of people were passing away in their early 30s, late 40s, something like that. You start to really map out, what are you noticing? So even if you're not able to have somebody just hand you a family health history, you have other ways to try and make some of those connections. And that can really help when you look at your own medical history, or when you're trying to fill out those forms and you have that one side that just feels so blank, right? Because you're like, well, I don't know those answers. So those are ways you can really try and learn that information, even if you're not able to get it from a person directly.
Right. Like, just talk about the importance of communities when it comes to genealogy.
It's a lot of a word.
Genealogy. You got me for the first time. For the first time today. I'm surprised. We were doing good. Yeah, but talk about the importance of communities when it comes to genealogy. like the schools, the
Mm-hmm.
churches, the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood,
So
like
in
that foundation.
2025, we don't live the way folks used to live. I don't know how often people go visit their parents anymore. Like, I live in the same town as my mom, but that's because I moved and then she moved here, right? It's not like I'm still in the town I grew up in. Um, and my grandparents were in a whole other state. And so everybody's really separated. But two things used to be the case. People used to be in more close-knit circumstances with their personal relatives, but whether they were or were not, they created a community, which we still do today, right? Still not as much as we used to because, the world is all weird now and we just talk to people on the internet instead of in person. But
Mhm.
school records, knowing who did you go to school with, what kind of clubs were you in, knowing, who was your social circle. Sometimes people ended up marrying somebody from their own social circle. Even just knowing who your neighbors were. I know we don't do the neighborhood kids play outside thing the way we used to, but that was your community. It could be, you're running home and the woman down the street pops her head out and reminds you better hurry up because it's almost time for the street lights, right? So like the community was smaller, and understanding the community that your family grew up in really impacts how they grew up. And some of those same traditions were passed forward to you, right? Were they really involved in the church? Were they really involved in
Mhm.
civic organizations? Were they big on giving back and doing like food donation drives for the community and things like that? The church was a very different thing than it is now. The church wasn't just a place of worship, it was really a major social structure as well. And for some people, it still is. But think about it. There were the auxiliaries. There could have been like uh, single nights that they would have at church. There could be the thing where, somebody's mama and somebody else's auntie were like, you know what? I think these two need to date and we're going to put them together. Right. So it was just a much more closed community. And that's how people formed relationships and they formed partnerships. And that's where people's best friends were oftentimes. And I think, too, especially in our community, when somebody says, oh, that's my auntie, well, we have to remember that didn't always mean there was a blood tie to that person. So when you're doing things like your genealogy, even if you've heard your whole life that Miss Sarah is, my auntie, well, she might actually not be. Or, my mom always said this lady was her aunt. Well, really, that was just her grandma's best friend. So just understanding that those titles and the way
Mhm.
we use the word cousins. Cousins also just means my best friend's kids to my kids, right? It doesn't necessarily mean there's a blood connection. So thinking about all of that and how important community was in getting messages out, getting news out, staying safe when the world around was not a safe place to be, right? In community, people were active, people were activists, people, started their own grocery stores, they started their own hair salons. There's all these things that were done that we don't see anymore because the world is so different. It's interesting because it feels like some of that is coming back right now. But if you
Mhm.
look at communities that are more recent arrivals to this country, you'll notice a lot of them still have their own grocery stores. They have their own hair shops. They have their own banks sometimes. And that's how our community used to be as well.
Yeah. 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 I guess a perfect example is my wife is Nigerian. Um, even the flocks of people that are here in America, um, like my father-in-law, he does everyone's taxes, of Nigerian descent in their community. They have someone that's, your handyman. They have someone that, um, is an account. Well, I already said my father-in-law is an accountant, but someone that's kind of like the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
They have a specific dentist they go to. So it's
Correct.
like they all stick together, and then like you said, with that, there's stories. It's like, yeah, my father-in-law can easily say, yeah, I helped your
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, with her taxes, and can tell stories about their relationship. And now I'm sitting here
Mm-hmm.
with you 30 years later, and
I think it is too,
that's
because
something that's missing to me.
the generational knowledge is not getting passed forward. And part of that is that people don't
Mm-hmm.
share it. And part of it is people don't want to hear it. I notice a lot of times people don't care about learning about their family history till they're like 60 or 70 years old. And then they're like, oh gosh, I'm the elder now. What were my elders doing? And they're gone. So it's one of those things where, okay, even if you're not super
Mm-hmm.
into it right now, it would be worth taking your phone, hitting record, whether you just have it face down, because it's not necessarily about the video even, that could be nice, but just face down and having a conversation with your elders and just asking questions. And don't make it feel like an interview because they shut down quick, right? When as soon as like, why are you asking all these questions? But just something like, for example, it's really cold here. I'm in Minnesota. It's negative, I don't even know what today, -6 or 8 or something. It's gross. But even just asking a question like, okay, well, we got kids outside walking to school in this. Did you guys have temperatures like this? And like, how did you still walk, or did somebody like come pick everybody up? Just asking little questions and then being prepared for those conversations to go wherever our elders want to take them. And not making it feel like, oh no, I have my 6 interview
Mm-hmm.
questions and I have to ask them. Kind of how we're doing. This is just a conversation, right? So that allows our seniors
Right.
and our
Right.
elders to really feel like you're curious. So as long as you're curious, they're usually a lot more open to having those conversations. And when it becomes like, here's my list of questions. What was your dad's
Mm-hmm.
name? And how old was this? Because you also don't want to put them in a situation where if pieces of their memory aren't working as well, that shows, because they'll shut down really fast if you're asking really specific questions and they might
Mm-hmm.
not remember.
Yeah. All right. So if someone's interested in your services, what do they need,
So if you're
and how can they get in
interested, all
contact
you
with you?
need to know is your own name. Maybe a parent would be ideal, but if not, that's all we need, because we can start with you and just build out. I think the other thing that's helpful is, what is the goal, right? Is the goal to just learn every single person in your entire tree, or do you have somebody that's like a mystery relative that you're trying to find? Or are you trying to find to figure out, okay, grandma always used to tell me these stories, but like I don't really know if they're true and I don't really remember them all. Can you help fill in the blanks on these stories? So just figure out, what are you trying to figure out? That's step 1. Step 2 is then you find me. So I'm on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, a little bit on YouTube, but mostly there. And you can email me on my website. So my company is really long, Anders Genealogical Services, but that's a whole mouthful. And fortunately, I have an uncommon name. So you can also just look up Mica, Mica, Anders, Anders, and I pop up pretty fast on the internet. So find me on there, send me a message, and we'll get started.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're pretty busy right now, especially like, I don't know if these two, if they combine or not, but say like with critical race theory and a lot of our history being taken out of the schools, like, does that impact you in any way as far as
It does.
more
It does.
interest
And because the other thing
in
I
your
do is I work with
expertise?
historical societies and libraries to teach and to share stories, and also to research like early histories that are being lost, to bring them back and make exhibits about them. So the more it's being taken out of certain environments, other environments are working really hard to make sure that those stories stay alive and stay active, so that that history doesn't get lost or forcibly removed yet again from history. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you already plugged your socials where we can find you. Leave us with a parting
It
shot.
matters. Family matters. Family history matters. It seems super weird and nerdy, but knowing where you come from and knowing those who came before you really helps you understand who you are and helps you on your journey going forward. So it is worth it, and it matters.
All right. Another one for the books with Mica Anders of Anders Genealogical Services. It's a pleasure as always. Make sure if you're looking for that loved one, you get in touch with her, because she will work to the very
Absolutely.
end to find that solution. So for Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.